Christopher, it's so good to have you back again. How are you?
Nice to meet you. Very nice, very good. Thank you. Hope you're well too.
Yeah. Okay, so we've done so much talking on so many of your projects. But this one is very fascinating, your studio research projects. So
Yeah.
if we could start with the rainbow cloud conceptual drawing. It looks to me like a glass installation, a suspended glass installation with a pictorial rhyme and rhythm. If I were a poet, so it has a little rhyme and rhythm. So if I were writing a poem, I could just look at the drawing and find the rhyme and rhythm speaking, as it were. So how did this drawing come to you?
Oh, can you show me the drawing?
Yes, I'm going to show you the drawing. I'm going to share the screen.
Yeah. Okay. I got it. As yet unrealized.
Yeah.
Yeah. I dream about this one.
Yeah. So how did you get? Get to the drawing? I know this kind of like a color impression, the kind of like a painting impression is there in many of your installations. As you walk through the Miami airport, for instance, you get that feeling.
Yeah. Immersion.
Yeah. So.
And this actually I did my piece Sonic Forest. I toured for 5 or 6 years to major music festivals in the US and Europe. And being a musician and an architect, that was like perfect for me. And so then some promoters asked me what else I might consider. And this was one of the concepts, to also be a touring piece for music festivals, because I found that a lot of music festivals, especially in the summertime, it was pretty hot, down in Tennessee or in England. And so people wanted to cool off. And also even at night. So I had done projects with water mist and fog in the past. And so I thought, well, let's make a touring piece that is being able to be immersed in this ever-changing cloud of color. And of course, there would be sound, there'd be speakers in the floor underneath. So it was really that idea of just being, immersed in color and sound in the summertime, at any time, day or night.
Yeah, so that feeling of immersion.
Yeah, no question. I mean, that's, as an architect, that's always what's intriguing me is, how can I make it, one of the things I really like about sound is that, you can make it so it wraps around you like a blanket. You can be in the sound, especially if you've got a quadraphonic sound system, you got speakers all around you. And so that whole idea of physical music, being able to see the music, that this is definitely in that genre for me.
And so we'll talk about the next studio research project that you have, which is called the light cloud or the light box sculpture, which is beautiful, these beautiful translucent colors again. What draws me more into this project than just the colors are the shapes. So you are so much into percussion and choreography, I know, And
Right.
photographers experiment with space, and space symmetry gets manipulated. So the moving images are just always in a state of flux. So order or symmetry or choreography, what went behind this project? Do you want me to share the screen for this one too?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Show me the picture, please.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
Right. Okay, excellent. So this actually, it's in the same genre as the rainbow cloud. It is this idea of being able to project into translucent material, whether it's muslin, or in this case, you can see some screens here where I'm projecting through it. And I used to do projects like this even in the 70s, sort of coming out of rock and roll light shows. We did things where we would hang muslin or cheesecloth. Yeah, let's stay on that image for a minute. We would hang things over big balloons in the middle of the room, and then we would project slides onto them. So, and the slides might be forms and it might be color, but it definitely is in that genre. And then when I was putting together the concert that I did in New York in 2016, hold on, it was Exploring the Hidden Music with Bill Laswell, Treelock Gertrude, Sheila E. I put together a really good band for this. In the early designs of what I was going to do, I wanted to have this cloud form in the middle of the room, and we would light into it, and we would be able to move the cloud up and down. So it could get down very low, and that also would be changing the shape of the room, making it more intimate as opposed to raising it up and having it be more grand. But it also involves the idea of form that you don't see, for example, in the rainbow cloud. It's literally the cloud is ever moving amorphous kind of shape, whatever the wind does to it, which I like. But I'm also very interested in form and iconic forms. Certainly Anish Kapoor's Cloud Gate in Chicago is, really one of my favorite contemporary sculptures and public art sculptures. And I really admire his work. He's got a great sense of abstract form and iconic form, because that's the difference. It's the same in form as it is in music. I mean, you can write music for 30 years and never make an iconic piece of music, or you can be the Beatles and you can make iconic music every day. Lennon and McCartney had over 300 sessions together writing music, and just they knew how to do it. And it wasn't that they knew, right? I mean, they're just very evolved songwriters, and they're very much the way that their whole genre of music either both led and was part of the transformation of the culture. I mean, Sgt. Pepper's, along with Brian Wilson's Pet Sounds, I mean, those two albums were seriously avant-garde, okay? But they're iconic enough and have iconic music, even as in the simplicity of what it is. I mean, that's the trick, isn't it? It's not about being complex, it's actually about being simple. And to me, that's also the same with form. And so, somebody like Anish Kapoor's work, when I see it, I say, okay, there's nothing complex about the Cloud Gate, but it is, you're not going to forget what this thing looks like. So those are the kinds of things that I look for and I explore when I'm trying to actually maybe push the music into form. And certainly these examples of light cloud and rainbow cloud are my attempts and my investigations into those areas.
Yeah, and it's a beautiful way to get into your mind as to, when you are starting a project or when your project is complete, to go back to the seedling, and these projects are helping us understand what goes
Yeah.
behind, before you start the grand project.
Right, right, right. Well, I, uh, you know, artists all, I mean, it's not hard finding the solution. It's really just hard creating the problem. I mean, I have plenty of solutions. I just have to wait for the right problem to come along. So, when I get a commission to do a project, uh, there's any number of things that I'm working on and thinking about. So the idea is like, okay, how can are there ways that I can transform those raw ideas that I know are powerful to me and iconic on some level, and integrate them into the current commission. So I would even say this was true with architects in terms of Frank Lloyd Wright and even early Frank Gehry. I mean, you can see there's a thread of form through all their work. I mean, they might get a new commission, but you can see it's building on previous ideas, architectural ideas, spatial ideas. So, I think that's very much artists and architects think about things in those ways, You don't wait for the problem to come along for you to begin thinking about the solution.
Yeah, and one of your very universal, I think, installations is the one in Miami,
Uh,
the Heat basketball court.
yeah,
And I think it's very universal because recently they changed the floor, the color, and everything. And
right.
yet your installation seems to sit just as well as it was before.
Yeah, yeah.
So, yeah, so we were noticing that.
Excellent,
Um,
excellent. Well,
and
that was you know, uh, I love the scuba dive, and that's about immersion, and that's zero gravity. There's all kinds of good things about scuba diving. You don't have to go down deep. You don't have to go down 50 feet. You can go down 10 feet, especially, you want to be at the level where the light is coming through and illuminating the transparency of the fish and the coral and just all the bright colors. That's what really, that together with the zero G is pretty, I was just thinking about it this morning, actually. But I think that when I was asked to create a design for the scoreboard in Miami, I remember the early drawings had it, the lines, all the spokes were straight. It was like a bursting star. And it was really about, thinking about, well, most scoreboards are very big and bulky and you can't see through them. And so I wanted to try to make something that was more airy and more sort of light, at least looked to be lightweight. And I don't know, I think my initial meeting with the client, I said, well, here's the sketches and that's going to be something like this. I said, oh yeah, no, that'll be great. That'll be great. And then about a week later, I said, no, wait a minute. Those things should be wavy. It should be like underwater anemone. The whole idea is that, all those nice images that I get from scuba diving, in the Pennicamp Underwater National Forest right there, just south of Miami. I said, this is very much about being in South Florida. And so then I sort of had to go back and say to the client, well, look, I've actually come up with an even better idea. And, fortunately, Jay Cross, who was the head of the Miami organization at that time, he's trained as an architect and an urban planner. So
wow.
I didn't have to like push it too hard. He could see the evolution of the form. He could understand. They said, no, this will be great. This will be great. So, but it really was that idea of like, okay, I've been looking at these forms for years. Again, I had the solution in my head. I was just waiting for the problem to come along and present itself. So that's very much, how that sort of nice marriage of that form in South Florida, in the middle of the arena, sort of the jewel in the crown. It all evolved.
Yeah, yeah, it adds to all the energy and the
Yeah.
vibration. And since I've been there multiple times, and I'm a Heat fan,
Oh,
my
nice.
son.
Nice.
Okay, so I'll go to the next question, and
Yeah.
that is about. Actually, I've been recently studying a little bit about, or trying to understand how spirals work, just not in art and nature, but also in writing and imagery. And a lot of people have told me, your writing is a little winded like a spiral. So I was like, is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know, but spirals are constant in many of your projects, and though not in visual dimensions, but more as optical movements. So your studio research on spirals, I'll just pull up the share the screen. And could you tell us more about,
Right.
when you
Right.
did this and how do you
Yeah.
implement such
Yeah.
ideas?
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
okay. There's a, you've touched on a couple of important ideas. One is that, I sort of think that uh, I've said before, I haven't thought of a new idea since I was 27, just because it feels like I always keep coming back around to this idea about immersion or being or sound influencing perception. I mean, there's some very fundamental ideas that I keep coming back to. But in fact, it's not coming back to it because it's actually a spiral. By the time I come back to it, I'm already this much farther ahead. So it's really like a spiral that's going up. When I come back and revisit these ideas, I'm revisiting them having thought of other things or having developed other things. So, spirals hold a special place for me. That particular study is something that I'm still working on, actually. Uh, uh, it is a scale model, actually, for an environment that would be about 12 or 15 feet tall. So you would actually walk inside those things.
Okay.
But, and that particular one that you just showed is one of the early examples of being able to print in 3D clear. And you can see it's not 100% clear. It's like about 85% clear. And you can see the rib lines, okay, all of which is, that has some aesthetic benefit to it. But nevertheless, my goal is to try to understand, is there a way that we can make these kinds of curved forms 15 feet high? And, we're still working on it. I mean, we're now 3D printing the molds from which I will cast them in water clear epoxy, just as a way to okay, let's just find a way to get up in scale. But also this idea of being able to 3D print the mold. I mean, you basically I draw the form, and instead of then printing the form, I print the mold from which I will make the physical form. So there's lots of investigations going on there. But I would also say that in my 20s, I worked for a lot. I was the tech director for a lot of different artists, helping them solve how to build different kinds of objects. And Frank Stella, I worked with, Robert Morris, Klaus Oldenburg. But the one I worked for the longest was the painter and sculptor Jack Youngerman. And if you look at Jack's sculpture, his fiberglass sculpture, which I developed with him in terms of the whole process, but it's very much of this kind of really beautiful organic forms. And I was, well, I'd have to say I was seriously influenced. I mean, I love his work, and I love his idea of form. So that's always been I know what I think is good form. and sublime form. You know, Rauschenberg isn't really known for sublime form. Let's put it that way. But Jack is, and that drawing or that sculpture that you just showed has a lot of that Youngerman kind of form like energy in it. But the idea being, okay, now let's take this idea, let's add my ideas about transparency and transparent color and scale. Let's make it so that we're not looking at a sculpture, but we're able to actually walk into a piece of art. And needless to say, we haven't found a solution as to how to make something that big in glass in that way. But, you know, I talk to people every month about different ways to do it. But my current state is now that we're making the molds. We can have the molds printed and then cast it so that I can have something that's not just 12 inches, but actually even 48 inches. I mean, let's go up in scale so we can see what it's really like. And that also helps me when I'm talking to other manufacturers saying, look, this is, I'm not just going to draw it for you. I'm going to show you, but instead of being 1 foot or 4 feet, how can I make it 15 feet? So very much, you know, in other projects of mine, you have to wait for the technology to catch up. And I don't know, it might not catch up, but nevertheless, it shouldn't diminish the aesthetic intent. I have to be very specific about waiting for the technology to catch up, not changing the form in order to meet the current technology. That's not my interest.
Yeah, and I love how you use the word energy, because the spiral form does give that energy
Sure.
that pushes out, you know. So we will talk a little bit about your transparent studio colors, which is very expensive, which is like, I think I see it in shadow boxing, circling, or passing light, or invisible color. The
Sure.
tension that is caused by the colored forms in this project and the sounds that create patterns as a result make me wonder, or at something basics, on something very basic, what are the ways you hear? I know we've talked about this before, but I'm talking in the context of your transparent studio colors. And what are the ways you see? And most importantly, what is the intersection between hearing and seeing? I'm trying to make a visual, I'm trying to make your vision
Yeah.
or your sonic consciousness
Right.
a learning experience for students. So
Right.
I'm going to screen share.
Right. Righto. This is great. I love this. Yes. Yes, absolutely. Right. Right.
This is so beautiful. You can
Yeah, yeah.
see.
Well, this, you know, let's step through a few of these. Okay. So let's stay with, no, go back, go to the drawing there. Yeah. Okay. So this is pretty much how it starts in this particular, this is the Sound is an Invisible Color series. And this was really about, at a certain time, I said, you know, I've made all these large architectural installations around the country and in Europe, but, you know, so, you know, I have a good understanding about what I'm trying to do, but what I really want to do now is create a group of works for an exhibition that help to embody and illustrate my ideas about the interrelation between color and sound and form, right?
Mhm.
Okay, so that was very much where these started from. And I knew, I've done a lot of work with transparent resin as well as transparent glass, but in terms of the resin, I have certain techniques where I know I can cast the resin. It comes in liquid form, right? You cut a catalyst into it, and it's going to go from liquid into a leather state and then become stiff. So very much in the spirit of Noguchi, doing plaster sketches, as he called them, where he only had so much time to sketch something in plaster before it got hard. And me being a jazz musician, I understand completely about time as a factor in creating something. And also you only have, you have a certain amount of time in which to do something. And so these lines, were to be 3, 4, 5 foot long sticks of transparent color that I would make one at a time. And so here there's some early form and color studies, and you can see they're around this circle. Now,
Yeah.
we can say that, yes, because in that circle is where I have the piece that has the audio speaker and a touch sensor. And, so that was part of the reason what dictated this particular form. But if you go all the way back to my work, even in the early 70s, coming out of college, you can see how the circle is the ego. It is the spirit that, to me, it manifests the spirit. And then there are certain things that are always happening around that circle. So, I didn't think about these things consciously. And now that you are asking me about them, I'm just sort of dredging them up. But it's very much, I think that's part of what's going on here. So now go to the next one. Okay, so here you see a bunch of studies, some of them circular, some of them just really playing with form. Like just, you've got to find a way to actually play with things creatively, just like practicing your musical instrument every day. You practice your scales and then you basically play every day. And that's what, you start to think about the aesthetic and the artistic ideas. And that's really what these studies are all about. And you can see the 3 on the left are all spirals around some center spiral piece. So, you can see that that's a very important part of the forms that I think about. Okay, so the next image. Right, okay, so now you have to basically, oh, this is great. So now you have to think about, okay, wait a minute. I've got these ideas, but how do you bring them into the real world? And that's where the rubber meets the road. I mean, I know how to do this work because I've been working in resin for now maybe 40 years. So, I have a certain facility with the material, with the chemistry, and certainly this idea of transparent color. That is what's most interesting to me. And so here you start to see that, I'm thinking of ways that I can actually make the physical piece. And you can sort of see what this looks like versus what those early colored drawings look like. And, there's a lot of similarity to them, but you see the clamps, you see the styrene strips. I mean, those are all tricks that I know how to do in order to make the form look as sort of free and spontaneous as possible. But there's obviously nothing spontaneous about it. I mean, you have to really work through it. There's a lot of pieces that I throw out, which is nice. You really basically get to go through and make the piece, and then I get to say, well, wait a minute. Now that I've got it to where it's visually close to completion, I really don't like that second color that I made. So I can pull that piece out and I can cast it in that same shape in another color and put it in. So now I really get to the point where I can edit. But this whole method is you know, is what I had to develop and have to develop and enjoy doing to get to this kind of condition. So wait, let's go to the next piece, the next image. Right. Okay. Well, now these gray tubes. Yeah. No, go to the other one there. The other one. There you go. So these gray tubes, those are actually foam insulation for copper pipe. You can buy them at Home Depot.
Oh,
But they're as close to the dimension, the form, as what I thought it was going to be the finished piece. So now I can, before I even get into the color, I can just play with the form and the lines, as it were, and think about, okay, how might things might overlap or not. I mean, and a lot of this comes from being in the studios of Oldenburg and Stella and younger men and watching how they work. And especially with Jack Youngerman, when his paintings, he literally starts with the idea of dipping a piece of cheesecloth into a small cup of black ink, and then just pushing it onto a piece of paper. Okay, and he might do like 100 of those on a 24-inch by 24-inch piece of paper. And they're just form generators. And of those hundreds that he made, he might only pick one or two. But it's that idea of like, okay, how do I create a series of chance operations, as it were, from which I can then decide which ones I like better than which ones. And then he used to take those one or two or three and then start to draw them. And he'd draw them in a small shape. He would refine it, very much like what I'm doing here, sort of like, take the fundamental idea and refine it. And then at a certain moment, when he got it to where he wanted, he put it in an overhead projector and he projected on like a 10-foot by 10-foot canvas and draw it out. And then his assistants would start to fill in the colors based on his aesthetic. So it was very much, watching these other artists do this kind of creative play technique that, when I got in wanting to make these sorts of things, I knew that I had to find ways to not be able to just jump right to the end, but really what is the creative process and where's the flexibility that I want, that I think I want to have in order to get to the idea, the finished idea. Okay, so there's the form without the audio speaker in the middle. Okay, so again, I knew that, okay, I need to have this circular piece in the middle. And you can see at this point, I've made all the parts, I've numbered them all. So that when I take them apart and I have my assistants sand them and polish them, we all get it, go back the way it was. And if you don't have,
this is the finished piece.
yeah, exactly. So that's great to be able to show you the, to pick the process and then see what the finished piece looks like. But it's great to be able to talk about the whole process and then look at the finished piece. That's wonderful.
Yeah. We'll quickly deviate to the topic of Georgie Kepish and your experience of working with Otto, I know, and above all, your thoughts on John Cage's perspective, and how that deeply influenced you. I know you have things to share with us.
Okay, well then that was 3 questions. So pick, what should we do? Should we talk about Kepish first?
You could talk about Otto, you could talk about Kepish, you could talk about whatever comes to your mind.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the Center for Advanced Visual Studies, which was originally founded by Jerry Kepish, right, in the mid-60s. And it really was, at that time, one of the few, if not the only place where artists could come and literally do research and this is not figurative artists, obviously. And, we're basically in the mid 60s. There's a lot of things going on socially, politically, economically. Vietnam War, of course, and a lot of artistic ideas were really exploding. Certainly, people moving out of the gallery, out of the museum, onto the street, and it was interesting that Kepish was primarily a painter and an educator and an editor, but he didn't really do much work in the street. But he formulated this institute at MIT, and where he invited different artists who were really interested in art and the environment and the public environment. And Otto Pina was actually one of the first artists invited, which was sort of interesting, because I always thought of Professor Kepish as, well, he's a little uptight, okay? He's a very nice person, and we had some differences of opinion, and we also had some great talks. And I always thought it was interesting that, Otto wasn't really of his same ilk, as it were. But I knew of Otto's work. I knew of Group Zero. I'd studied it when I was in college. And I thought, that he was already, Otto Pina was already doing events in the street. And, as someone who was in the late 60s, thought he knew what architecture was, played a lot of music. Somehow, why aren't those things just so close? Shouldn't those things be more closely related? And apparently not in architecture schools. But I could immediately resonate with Otto Pina's work. He was doing large scale. He then got the commission to do the closing ceremonies to the 1972 Munich Olympics. And I said, that's kind of stuff, that to me, that's architecture. That's a grand public scale, a large event. This is before really any kind of music concerts were ever formulated. And, but I could see, I would like to find out more about this artist. And so, well, when I finished college in 72, 73, I then moved to New York. I was playing a lot of music, and I was working for a company that made sets and special effects for theater and television. So I think after about 3 years in New York, besides the fact that I was running out of money, which was easy to do in New York, and I was running out of sleep. I'd work in the day and I'd play music at night. So I said, I'm just going to I'm going to just blow up here if I don't pick something. And so at that point, Otto was in line to be the next director of the Center for Advanced Visual Studies in 1975. And I'd already been accepted to the architecture school at MIT, but I knew, now I'm like 25 years old, and I'm starting to get the idea, what it is I really want to be committed to and what it is I don't want to be committed to. And so, I went and visited with Otto, and basically he said, you're really the kind of person that should be here at the center. And we're just starting this graduate program. And the fact you've already gotten into the architecture school, this shouldn't be a problem. So the program actually didn't start for a year. So I said, well, I'll just defer for another year. I got plenty to do in New York, but I sort of now know where I'm going to go next. And that was really the beginning of being at the Center for Advanced Visual Studies. Kepish was sort of on the way out, and Otto's and his philosophy and he's also a musician. He also played piano, and was very much on the way in. So I was just going to ride that wave, and I rode that wave for 10 years. So I think that idea of an art education at a place like MIT, the kind of art that Otto does. I mean, if Otto was teaching somewhere else, I would have gone where he was. I think the point is, my feeling is, in terms of art education, especially, you find somebody whose work you really admire. And if they're not teaching, you go and you see if you can be a studio assistant. Or, I mean, art is really something having to do with osmosis. You have to just be around it and absorb both consciously and unconsciously what is going on with this, how this person works. I mean, when I did projects for Klaus Oldenburg, I used to watch him draw. He's drawing like a 3-year-old. He's just being very free and just making all kinds of mistakes and stuff like that. Then all of a sudden, boom, what? I didn't see him do that. What the hell? How did that happen? A giant baseball bat. How did he think of that? So, but it's that kind of, you just need to be committed to being in the environment. And Otto he understood this. And he also understood that I understood it, knowing that I was also a jazz musician. And so I think I very much inherited Otto's philosophy and Otto's aesthetic. And I think that a lot of the work that I developed, Heartbeat, a lot of the interactive installation, Sound Stare, all those things I did in those 10 years that I was at MIT. And it was really that Otto just knew how to leave me alone and only sort of comment from time to time. So, I think it did come a point, though, where I realized, I'm not getting everything I need here in terms of being an artist, in terms of being, technically proficient and understanding how to manage projects. I mean, I was the project manager on any number of projects for the center. So, I sort of got to both be an artist in the group and also then manage how the whole project was done, because I knew how to do that, from organizing bands and organizing events. So, but I think at a certain moment, well, I think also a good point was I ran into John Cage. and he, and I was old enough to appreciate who he was and what he was doing. And he liked what I was doing in terms of my experiments with interactive sound. So I could see that my aesthetic energies were being pulled more back into New York. And, it really isn't that far away from Boston. And but then I got an offer to teach at Cooper Union in New York. And so I did that for 15 years. And that was really sort of leaving the MIT, leaving Kepish, leaving Otto to a certain degree, and becoming more involved in the art scene in New York and doing projects in New York.
Yeah, but it was a beautiful transitional period that you came in when Kepish was leaving and Otto was taking, hold of the situation. And you
Right.
came in this beautiful period where you could see the best of both worlds and you knew exactly what you wanted for yourself and your vision.
Well, I don't know about exactly, but by that time I'd thought about it a lot, and I knew what I wasn't going to do. I knew I wasn't going to be what everybody else thought an architect was. And I knew that, like, what it is I'm thinking about, we don't have a name for it. And I'm not worried about that. At this point, I've been practicing meditation for 5 or 6 years. So, and reading a lot of books about contemporary art, Duchamp, and a lot of contemporary painters And so, I could see, wait a minute, there's a thing out there called art. And it's just as physical, it's just as solid as architecture. You just can't necessarily touch it physically. But, living in New York for 3 or 4 years, that really, I had time to be absorbed into contemporary art scene and think about how much I really love to make art, and how architecture was really a much more, the process of architecture is a much more drawn out event. Obviously, it takes years to build a building. And so I'm still always very much a part of architectural ideas, being things that are immersive, being able to walk into something, being able to be surrounded by it. But in terms of, wanting to be involved, I mean, I've designed a number of houses for people, but I really not so interested to take it any farther than that. I'm more interested to say, okay, let me do something with your entrance to your building that somehow gives people a unique architectural experience, which is essentially the envelope into the building and coming out of the building. So, and very much, on large projects, especially, the most recent children's hospital I did in Baton Rouge, Our Lady of the Lake Children's Hospital. There's any number of architects and engineers involved. So I'm saying, like, okay, look, my job is the aesthetic side of the entrance. So that's my little fiefdom. And I realize I have to interface with all you guys, and I have to, we all have to work together to make this building, but I'm staking out this part. So there's much more of a negotiation situation going on when you're doing it, when you're involved in a building. But I think you also have to remember that you're trying to be an artist. And just like a musician, you have to find ways to practice every day. Because if you don't practice every day, when you get the shot to play Carnegie Hall, if you're not ready, I mean, it's all for naught. So, you have to sort of, on the one hand, keep up your art chops, find ways, and certainly building those transparent resin sculptures is part of my way to keep my art chops up, the sculptures with the sound. And at the same time, you have to sort of negotiate your way through a larger scale project.
So before I let you go, we'll talk briefly about your daily aphorisms. I'll just screen share.
Yeah.
And I'm very fond of this. It was your recent post on Facebook, I saw.
Yes, absolutely.
And I'll just go skim through this.
Yeah.
If you want me to stop somewhere, let me know. This is beautiful. This is a chair, right? This is a view from the top.
Right. But, this is also about the art chops. This is about, ways to put myself in a place where I only am dealing with the aesthetic issues, that I'm changing my perception of what I'm looking at through the text, for example. How one
itself is an installation.
Say it again.
I said this in itself is an installation, this chair.
No, absolutely. But I think the more important thing is it's like a Zen cone. Okay? It's more about where the image together with the text puts your mind. And that's very much, my visual side of my work together with the audio side of my work. Hopefully, like the Reach piece that's in the New York City subway.
Yeah.
I mean, you're underground in this man-made environment, but when you trigger the patterns, you hear the sounds of a rainforest with birds and frogs. So, that kind of juxtaposition is what intrigues me. And those aphorisms are really about that. Just, doing that, continuing to do that so that I keep my chops up, so that when I go to make an installation, I haven't, it's not so much haven't forgotten, it's just that, also my aesthetic has evolved. And it's been harder during COVID, I have to say, because, you know, the work has been, the work to the outside world has been slower, haven't traveled nearly as much. Uh, uh, and so, you know, I've had to sort of crank up the aphorisms and the studies so that I can sort of like keep that side of the energy up.
Yeah, you talked about reach, so I'm going to just screen share on reach.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the aphorisms makes me think. I love the collection, you know, of the images, the paradoxes, the colors, the twists.
Yeah.
And I'll just read out what Ezra Pound once said. The design of the future in the grip of the human vortex. All the past that is vital, all the past that is capable of living into the future is pregnant in the vortex now. So we just talked about the spiral, and now we're talking about these twists and the vortex. What do you think, or your thought about the energy or the vorticism in your own art? I mean, I think I see it in a lot of your work.
No, I think, you know, if you look at you look at Carl Jung's work,
Mhm.
psychologist, and archetypal forms, and you know, he writes a lot about the circle.
Yes.
I mean, the circle as the center of the ego and the
Mhm.
center of the energy, and uh, you know, that's how I think about it. Certainly, you know, the burning drum piece, which we've talked about,
Mhm.
which, you know, is the burning of the snare drum, but it's also a circular piece. And then next to it is Shiva, and Shiva's in a ring of a circular ring of fire. And
Mhm.
this piece you're showing now circling, which is at the DFW airport. I mean, I don't know that anybody gets as spiritual a hit as me off it, but you know, it
I
is
do.
very
I
much
kind of do.
that idea.
I feel the energy of colors and vibrations and shapes and movements everywhere. So I seek for them.
Yeah, no, I agree. This turned out to be a very good example of that idea, creating a labyrinth, a concentric labyrinth of color and sound in an otherwise, which hopefully is more like a labyrinth, really, in terms of being a soothing place in an otherwise cacophony that is a public airport.
Yes, and I think another example is here. I'll share screen again. The sonic rings.
Right. Sure. Sure. Right. Well, that was very much, you know, this was developed for the London Olympics. And, you know, obviously it's sonic forest in a concentric series of concentric circles uh, with the seating in the middle and this whole idea of sort of the immersive sound moving around you. So, you know, that's all very much part of it for me. You say, wait, okay, so you see this right here is a design that I did on a swimming pool. And this is in like 1974.
Oh my God.
And what you see there in the middle, you see a sort of a Mondrian-like design.
Uh-huh.
And those are color strips sitting on bubble wrap. That's why they can float on the surface. But in the middle is that circle. It's actually a red circle with an orange, smaller circle in it.
Yeah.
Well, okay. And, you know, it was very much this idea of a painting. And none of the pieces floating on the pool are actually connected. So the idea was to photograph it over 3 days with the wind and watch just how it sort of all breaks up and goes from this very sort of man-made ordered form to this more chaotic situation. But it was always that, okay, the circle there is me being hemmed in by physical constraints. And through letting go and just becoming part of nature to become free.
Like an open circle. You're like an open circle.
1974, I was 24 years old. So
Yeah, no wonder you wanted to be under Otto.
who knows? But yeah, you can also see in Otto's painting, actually, the use of the circle quite a bit.
Yeah.
It's a pretty archetypal form. And like I say, Carl Jung has a lot to say about it, and I really admired his kind of analysis.
Yeah. So it was very nice talking to you, Christopher.
Always.
And
Thank
I'm
you.
going to hope to see you soon again. Thank you for coming.
Okay, I hope
in
so.
the Creation Lab.
All right.